I always want you to know when you're watching the show, you're not wasting your time. We don't put much filler in here. We think if it's on the show, it has some meat on the bone. We would rather just end the show 20 minutes into it than give you filler. But why listen to me tell you that when we can listen to other people tell you that? So Jack Swarbrick, most of you know who that is. If you don't, that's the Notre Dame athletic director, very influential power player in the world of college football. He sat down with SportsIllustrated.com, I think it was Pat 40 specifically, within the last week. And he had some interesting things to say. I'll tell you how all this ties in just a second. First off, on the future of college football, he said, there's always been sort of a spectrum, and I want to stress that everything along that spectrum is valid. It's not a criticism. On one end of the spectrum, you license the school name and, listen to this part, you run an independent business that's engaged in sports. The other end of the spectrum, you're integrated into the university in terms of decision-making and requirements, and some would follow that. Well, that's an interesting parallel. That surely doesn't sound like 4 super conferences like everyone had assumed for a while. Hey, what about some collateral damage? Jack Swarbrick speaks up again. Quote, I hate to see it. That's going to be interesting to see how the federal government approaches it. If all of this revenue is disproportionately coming to men, even if you didn't set it up that way, how does Title IX analyze that? This starts to sound more familiar by the second, but Jack Swarbrick, not done. The third quote, in response to who's in charge here? We're not getting leadership from the NCAA. It's going to have to come from elsewhere. It's interesting to see how challenging it is to get the university presidents, think you know where this is going, really on board with anything, to work together. It's not that they're resistant to it. They've just got too many things going on. Don't be bothered with quite literally saving the sport. There are more important things to do. Those are my words, not Jack Swarbrick's. Now, if that sounded familiar to you, it's because you were probably watching our show last month. And if you weren't, let's refresh your memory. Roll it, Colin. But there will be essentially 2 worlds that exist. One of the worlds is one that maintains the academic attachment, the true student-athlete model, and the other acknowledges what it sees as an inevitability or a reality at that point and says, some of them really didn't come here to play no school, did they? So you know what? Let's stop pretending. And also that group over there who wants essentially a semi-pro model, they're also going to look around and they're going to say, right now, this is chaos. Let's get to where those guys can have employment status attached to them. And however we have to do that, we do it. But not only that, then they can collectively bargain. They have at their disposal now probably TV revenue distribution. A lot of things open up. A lot of possibilities open up. But here's what it coincides with. It coincides with being honest about what we're doing here and being honest about the fact that this is about football more than academics. And we're not going to pretend like it's otherwise. Also, you got to keep in mind there's this pesky little thing standing in the way of a lot of this right now called Title IX. You want to know how you get away from that? You get away from it by not being attached to the university in an academic fashion at all. You're just a brand. You are licensing, essentially, the branding of that school at that point. But what he has now is he has a contract, in turn, that he has signed. Coming out of high school, goes wherever he goes, and you're not just going to move around. And there's a lot more structure in NIL now. We can do it legislatively because we now are acknowledging that you are an employee. Well, here's the thing. There are going to be some programs that are willing to go down that road. There are going to be some conferences that are willing to go down that road. There are going to be others that aren't. You could see a world down the road where it's not so much there's the SEC, there's the Big 12, there's the Big 10. It could be there's the semi-pro version of college football and there's the classical version of college football over here. Yeah, we're live again now. So how do you feel about that? To be clear, what Jack Swarbrick said this week and what we said last month is the direction we're headed is not the direction that people have painted on a chalkboard for you over the past 5 to 10 years, where we're either going to be 3 super conferences or 5 super conferences, and let's talk about what the structure of the playoffs is going to be. The reason no one's had a definitive answer on that stuff is because that's not what the conversations have been behind the scenes. Like I told you, you're not wasting your time when you're listening to us talk about this. I wouldn't have run my mouth to that degree a month ago if I didn't know what I was talking about. Now the Notre Dame athletic director kind of echoed that sentiment. He's not the only one. Everybody behind the scenes is talking about this. And to be clear, if you didn't understand what I said there or what he said, they are talking about a world, his estimate is the mid-2030s, but really that's a guess, wherein you don't have the Pac-12 or the SEC and the Big Ten. What you have is you have two groups. You have one group of teams, of universities, if you want to call them that have decided we're all in. We're going to treat the players as employees. We're going to give them revenue sharing. They're going to collectively bargain. It will essentially be a mini National Football League. It will be a semi-pro league, and they won't pretend it's not. And all they'll do is they will license the ability to use the brand of South Carolina or Florida or Texas, but it will not be the traditional college football that you've known. Then, predictably, as we said a month ago, there will be other universities that say, we want nothing to do with that. Here, whether it be Stanford or Notre Dame, wherever, we will always have an academic attachment. These will always be student athletes. We are not going down that road because it is not the spirit of what college athletics is supposed to be. And by the way, if you want to know where I land on this, it's with them. It's not with the semi-pro model. This is a mess. It's been coming for a while, but if you want to know why no one in that room in Indianapolis last January could arrive at a conclusion on what the playoff format should be, it's because there are infinitely bigger issues in play than just whether you should have 8 teams or 12 teams. That's what's kept a lot of the talk shows busy. We haven't really done a whole lot of that on this show, only because every time I do, the iJosh lights up or my DMs light up with someone who is wearing a suit that's worth more than me, working in a building in Indianapolis or Birmingham or Charlotte, and they're saying, don't even waste your time with it. That's not what we're talking about behind the curtain right now. So now that we've got that out of the way, how do you feel about it? Do you like where college football is going? Do you like where college athletics are going? You got a lot of these coaches, not just in football, retiring, telling you they want to spend more time with their families. They don't like where it's headed. That's the end result. They don't like where it's headed. So we can talk about the problems all we want to. We can talk about what's going on right now all we want to, but there's one question on everyone's mind. The real question on everyone's mind is, how's it all going to shake out? What's college football ultimately going to look like? In atmospheric science, when a tornado comes through, the National Weather Service goes out the next day and the survey team looks at the damage and they give an assessment, EF2, EF3, EF4. The reason no one has a definitive answer for you right now as to where college football is going to end up is because we're in the tornado. It's not past. We are in it right now. NIL's out of control. You've got the transfer portal out of control. You've got conference realignment. You've got folks smack dab in the middle of restructuring their television deals. You've also got playoff expansion and what that's going to look like. That's what it's like to be in the tornado. No one knows. Not even the conference commissioners, not the athletic directors, not the president of the NCAA, whomstever that will be. No one knows. No one has a well-reasoned and articulated response. So they all just shrug their shoulders. But that's the problem. It's okay for me to shrug my shoulders or you to shrug your shoulders. We're not in charge of this stuff. They are. It's unacceptable for a sport this great to have leadership this poor. And to be clear, I'm not talking about the NCAA. Anyone who observes college athletics has long since gotten away from the notion that the NCAA is properly equipped to legislate and govern college athletics. It's the conference commissioners and its television executives. Make no mistake about it, those are the two entities who run college football. It's up to them. Everybody agrees we got a problem. It's like we're all on the same bus, and it's barreling towards the edge of a cliff. But the problem is, while we're in the passenger seats, you look to your left and you look to your right, and the conference commissioners and TV executives are sitting right there with you. No one's in the driver's seat. No one who has the responsibility to have their hands on the wheel has their hands on the wheel, because they all look at you, especially conference commissioners right now. Not saying they're bad people. I'm saying they're good people making bad decisions. And they tell you, well, it's really just my job to look out for my conference. That's great. And that's technically correct. Let me ask you something. You can build the fanciest neighborhood you want to. If the city it is in burns down around the neighborhood, what happens to the property value? In fact, what's the point of having the neighborhood? Like, do we really need to go over this? There are all kind of baseline metaphors for this. Do we really need to remind folks what happened? The value of having a platform of college football and that sport being healthy, like we grew up knowing it, for example, is mandatory. It's a requirement for you to cash in on the checks that you want to cash in on, or for your brand's flag to fly at the level you want it to fly at. We're showing you right now a lot of the estimates, if you're watching on YouTube, about the average payout per team in a supposed 12-team playoff model. Like, all this just assumes things. It assumes something that shouldn't be assumed. So while we're all talking about warnings, while everyone's busy issuing a warning, I'd like to issue one to conference commissioners and to TV executives, because those are the only people really equipped to get this thing back on the rails. You are badly mistaken. And for a while now, you have assumed something is a constant when it's actually a variable. And that is me. That's the folks watching this show. It's fans. It is your P1 demographic. It is your hardcores. Many an organization has mistakenly taken for granted in the past, and they have suffered the consequences, i.e. NASCAR, i.e. pro wrestling in the late 90s. Don't do the same thing. You assume that the passion that you've come to expect, you've assumed that the attendance figures, you've assumed that the viewership numbers will always be there, and from this point forward, you can make any kind of changes you want to, because they'll show up. No, they won't. No, they won't automatically show up. Ask the average fan. You guys aren't amongst them. I am. I talk to them every day. Ask the average fan how they feel about the sport now and how they feel about it 10 years from now, and then ask them, do you expect yourself to be as hardcore college football fan in 2032 as you are in 2022? The most optimistic among them kind of go, and the more realistic among them go, probably not, I'm just enjoying it while I can. Don't ever assume that hardcore college football fans are always hardcore college football fans. Just because something has been does not always mean it will be. And you need to also understand this, which you guys do. I should be preaching to the choir here. You should be finishing my sentences, but I'll say it anyway. There have never been more entertainment options on the face of this planet in any civilization than there are today and in this world moving forward. If you think that you can take folks coming to your watering hole for granted just because you happen to have something they grew up liking, you need to understand the only thing that keeps them liking what they have liked is that thing at least somewhat resembling what they grew up liking. If the sport becomes something unrecognizable and they look at it and say, that ain't my college football, they just walk away. And they may not come back. So I'm looking around right now, and I wish I could paint you a more rosy scenario. I don't think it's too late. So that's the optimistic side of me. But what has to happen is you have to have conference commissioners and television executives step up and say, we're supposed to be the smartest ones in the room. It's up to us to put our hands on the wheel and to guide the sport back into safer waters. And then, once we take care of all this stuff, once we get out of the tornado, then we can start jockeying for position again, and then we can try and carve ourselves out over here and get our niche based the way we want it to. You've got to have the sport. You've got to have the foundation. You've got to have the stage before you start writing the play. And you're taking it for granted, and I'm trying to tell you as bluntly as I can, you shouldn't. It may not be there by the time 20, 30, or 35 rolls around. So that is my passionate plea from the college football fan to the folks that actually should be running this thing, but have let it get far too out of control.